be talking about multiplying integers. Rules for multiplying integers. Example is 4 times 2 is 8. Negative 4 times negative 2 is positive 8. If when you're multiplying, the product of two integers with different signs is negative. Example, 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Example 2, negative 10 times 2 is negative 20. C, 0. The product of an integer and 0 is 0. No matter how many numbers, if you're multiplying and you have a 0 in there, your answer will always be 0. I'm going to pause the video. We're going to answer these next questions and come back and check. Okay, check your answers. Again, if there's a negative times a positive, it's negative. If they have the same sign, when you're multiplying two integers, the answer is always positive, and anything multiplied times 0 will be 0. Number 3, when multiplying more than two integers, consider two integers at a time. So in this example, let's take negative 3 times 2 times 5. Since we have three integers that we're multiplying times each other, you can take multiply them in any order because of the commutative property of multiplication. Okay, so if we took negative 3 times 2, that would be negative 6. And if we brought down the 5 to multiply it, negative 6 times 5 is negative 30. The second example, I have negative 2 to the 4th power. Notice the negative 2 is to the 4th power. This would be the same as negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, which would be positive 16. So negative 2 to the 4th power is positive 16. Now let's note the difference. What if I had something that looked like this? To the 4th power. Since the second example in blue does not have parentheses, that is understood as just the 2 is to the 4th power. So that would be negative 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, because just the number 2 is to the 4th power. So we're going to do 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which is equal to 16. And since you have a negative in front of that, that would mean the opposite of 16, which is negative 16. So note the difference when you're using parentheses. It indicates what is actually to the 4th power. Number 4, when multiplying integers, if there is an even number of negative signs, the answer is positive. For example, now, all these integers are multiplying. I'm going to count up how many negatives I have. Negative integers. 1, 2, 3, 4. Since there is an even number of negatives, the answer, I'm going to just put 4 here. Now I can just multiply. I'm going to multiply 2 times 2, which is 4, because the remaining integers are 1, and anything multiplied times 1 is itself. So this would be a positive 4. But let me show you why that rule is correct. If you took them 2 at a time, negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 times negative 1 is 2. Then 2 times negative 2 is equal to negative 4. Then if I took this negative 4 and multiplied it times my last integer, negative 4 times negative 1 is 4. So instead of you having to go 2 at a time like that in order to establish the rule, if there is an even number of negatives, your answer will be positive when you're multiplying. That being the fact, number 5, when multiplying odd integers, if there is an odd number of negative signs, the answer is negative. Okay, now I'm going to count my negative signs. 1, 2, 3. There are 3 negatives, so my answer will end up being negative. So now I can go ahead and multiply. 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 is 12. The answer is negative 12. Again, you can go back and check to see if that is true. Negative 2 times positive 2 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 1 is 4. 4 times negative 3, is negative 12. Again, if there's an even number of negative signs when you're multiplying, the answer is positive. If there's an odd number of negative signs when you're multiplying, the answer is negative. Now, I'm going to pause this. We're going to work each one out and come back and check our work. Okay, again, our final answer with the sign determines how many negative signs we have in the multiplication. Okay, now we're going to do a little mixed review here. We're going to find each sum, difference, or product. I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back and check our work. Notice on each one of these, they had a different operation. Notice that when I was subtracting integers, I added the opposite and then used my adding integers rules for that. All right, I'm going to pause this and we'll come back and check this. Please notice on each of these that I followed the rules for the operation for either addition, subtraction of integers. On J, K, and L, I did 2 at a time, but also used order of operations first and then answer 2 at a time. Simplify each one. Now we're going to use mental math. So we're going to solve for each of the variables. We need to determine what the variables are for each one. I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back and check our work. So in these, you're actually going to do the opposite. You're going to undo it. And in A, you try to determine what times negative 5 gives you negative 80 to check your signs. B, how many times does 3 go into 90? Then make sure it's going to be a negative because a negative times a negative equals a positive. And on C, it would be negative 4 because negative 4 times a positive 4 is negative 16. Okay, going to pause this. We are now going to substitute for the variables given. Come back and check our work. Okay, again, doing them order of operations, solving them, and using our rules for the signs. Okay, on G and H, again, we have variables that we need to substitute. Again, rewrite it right below the original problem. Solve using your rules. Again, rewrite the problem, substituting everything that is given to you. Please be aware that the negative sign also means the opposite. So in G, you have negative 2 squared, which is 4. But it is the opposite of 4, which makes it negative 4. Plus 9 equals 5. And then again, the rules for your 0 exponents and subtracting integers. We're going to review this. It's a mixed review, which means just like a buffet. So we're going to go through, take them one at a time, and come back and check our answers. Again, let me encourage you to check your work. Remember the rules for adding, subtracting, and multiplying with integers.
Safe.